morning. Welcome back to Conservatorium Maastricht, where we're holding our third day of Jazz Master Research presentations. Today we will start with a video presentation of Moritz Schippers, after which we will return here to the live room for the Q&A.
Hello, my name is Moritz Schippers, and today I would like to share with you an overview of my master's thesis entitled Nocturnal Musings, analyzing and recontextualizing the intricate piano harmonies of Marc Copland on the album Night Whispers. The musical element that has always fascinated me the most is harmony, and I love the sensation of discovering surprising harmonic turns that I hadn't heard before. When I became aware of Night Whispers, I was right away fascinated by its sound and Copland's harmonic approach, especially on his rendition of So What, that does away with Bill Evans's classic chord structures we know from the original recording, which seemed like quite a radical step to me. Marc Copland is an American jazz pianist born in 1948 who first made a name for himself as a saxophone player in the 70s. After becoming discontented with the limitations of the instrument, he re-emerged in the New York City jazz scene in his 30s as a pianist after having developed a remarkably unique harmonic language. The 2009 album Night Whispers, with Drew Grass on double bass and Bill Stewart on drums, is extremely focused on a particular sound which is very hard to put into words. Terms like nocturnal, misty, moody come to mind. To finally gain an understanding of what makes this album in particular and Copland's approach in general special and relevant to a modern musician, I decided to dedicate this research to it. Despite Copland working with musicians of the highest caliber during his more than 5-decade-long career, the academic community seemingly has not picked up on Copland, or at least not incorporated him into artistic research projects. That's why, apart from transcribing music, some investigation was in order to come up with other sources. I sought out interviews with Copland and conducted one myself with him and one of his collaborators to be able to get a closer look. To structure this research, I set the following research questions. What are the core elements of Marc Copland's harmonic expression on Night Whispers, and what might have influenced them? As a second step, to move away from the analytic realm into more creative areas and to find applications for my own professional practice, I let myself be guided by these considerations. Can those elements be made to work in other contexts than the classic acoustic jazz trio? And how can I incorporate these elements into my music in a creative way? This project, taking place in the realm of artistic research, is quite multifaceted and required a certain level of flexibility in approach. Because there were neither academic texts nor music transcriptions available, the groundwork was established through what could be described as elements of an exploratory research design. Overall, however, the iterative cyclic web, as introduced by Smith and Dean, offers a comprehensive way to integrate the various paths of creative exploration into a model that is compatible with academic standards. In this model, we can see overlapping processes between academic and artistic research and how they are related to each other. By this model, creative practice and its research results can be included in the academic world. As Smith and Dean write, terms such as practice-led research have been developed by creative practitioners to argue, as forcefully as possible in an often unreceptive environment, that they are as important to the generation of knowledge as more theoretically, critically, or empirically based research methods. In the following, I will guide you through some of the steps I undertook during this research journey, though for time constraints I'll leave out some here, and I would like to invite you to have a look at my thesis for more details. In order to answer my first research question, I employed various methods. I interviewed Copland for first-hand information, I searched for further interviews, transcribed sections from Night Whispers to have concrete musical material, and transcribed excerpts of Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock's recordings for comparison. First research steps led me to Pablo Hell's interview with Copland. I would heartily recommend it to anyone for a great introduction to Marc Copland, his work and his collaborations. Among the things I've gathered from this interview were Copland's admiration for Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock, Joni Mitchell, his contemporaries Ralph Towner and John Abercrombie, and it was the first time I heard of a certain book which subsequently popped up in other interviews as well.
And one of the books I like a great deal, you may know of it, I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but it's called The Shaping Forces in Music by Ernst Tuch. And I remember I used to read that chapter on harmony 2-3 times a week when I was 17 years old before I went to sleep. I was just like, this is so cool.
I met Marc Copland when I was young, like I was 18, I guess, and when I first met him, and we played together. And he hit me to this book by Ernst Tuch called Shaping Forces in Music, and there's a chapter there on harmony.
The Shaping Forces in Music by Ernst Tuch. The book consists of lectures held by Tuch, a neoclassical and atonal music composer in the 1940s. It was created out of the want of a textbook which offered a set of guidelines for classical as well as modern music composition. He felt the approved classical guidelines were not able to be applied to contemporary music, or even worse, could be misused for discrediting contemporary music, and were even lacking at explaining certain phenomena in the classical canon as well. The central message of the chapter Copland mentioned is Tuch arguing for the linearity of harmony. In his view, voice leading was too often taught as a means of achieving preconceived harmony, while he advocates for a broader view where each melody possesses linear self-preservation. In Tuch's opinion, the traditional harmonic writing stifles movement of the voices because they have to stay for common tones that are required to create preconceived harmony. The truth is that the melodic impulse is primary and always preponderates over the harmonic, that the melodic or linear impulse is the force out of which germinates not only harmony, but also counterpoint and form. He defines harmony as a momentary situation brought about by moving voices, the cross-section arising at times of arrested motion. And again later, harmony, consonance and dissonance, they are all the same substance or phenomenon or idea, arrested motion. What's the link to Marc Copland there? The focus on linear motion is echoed in several statements by Copland in interviews, and it seems to have been a central idea in his development of his understanding of music. During our conversation, he referenced Shaping Forces in Music in the following way.
What it is to me is about the process of hearing, improvising as like an ongoing chorale, so to speak, with a soprano and a bass, like Tuch talks about, and filling in the middle with voices that have independent motion.
Further on in the chapter, Tuch cites a short passage from Strauss's Rosenkavalier, where several triad chords are played high over a resting F-sharp major chord. Tuch suspects the existence of different harmonic streams as the genesis of this passage, writing, "It would be absurd to relate what goes on in the upper register to the harmonies sustained in the lower." This way of thinking also surfaces in Copland's piano playing, where often a string of harmonies happen in the right hand, while the left hand stays inside the changes of the composition. One of those places is a moment during Emily, where Copland stacks a C major 7, D major 7 and F major 7 sharp 5 over a ringing C sharp major structure in the left hand. Even later in the chapter, Tuch widens the scope of sources for harmony. While the previous examples mostly come from the traditional method of stacking thirds to build chords, Tuch now turns his attention towards other intervals such as fourth and fifths, perfect and augmented. Even a cursory glance at the transcriptions of Night Whispers reveals that Copland might have gotten encouragement here. Quartal and fifth voicings reappear multiple times throughout the recording. Copland, as a jazz pianist, combines Tuch's impulses with improvisation. This allows spontaneous, unplanned harmonic movements, which requires a strong focus on the ear. I contacted Copland in February of 2024 and was able to talk to him for an hour via video call. During the conversation, Copland shared some of his childhood influences in classical music, who are as vast as Shostakovich, Prokofiev and Debussy, that were part of his mother's record collection. Later, through high school friends, he learned of Sibelius, Vaughan Williams, and eventually Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, of which 17-year-old Copland bought a score of to investigate. Another source of inspiration were the Beatles. Concerning role models from the jazz world, very specifically Copland mentioned 2 tracks from a Herbie Hancock live recording called Dedication that for him exemplify a successful way of making use of Toch's principles in the jazz idiom. During his time as a saxophonist, he was a student at Lenny Tristano's studio who in his lessons focused on sharpening his students' ears. In an interview from 2023 with Jake Feinberg, Copland summarizes the experience in more general terms.
Taught me a way to figure out how to train the neuromuscular network and the inner ear to really be a tool to create musically. That's the best way I can state it.
He phrases it in another way in an email from 2025. The only result I'm interested in is to train and strengthen the links between the internal, what I'm seeing and hearing inside my brain, and the external, the instrument, the framework for improvisation, whether tune or free, and how other musicians in the band are playing and reacting. If the neural pathways between internal and external are working well, then the band can make a strong organic statement. Improvisation is the core factor in Copland's harmony, and because of its spontaneous and fleeting nature, certain processes are difficult if not impossible to put into words. The improvisation is not without rules, of course, and follows the flow of voices in a choral arrangement. This interview at the latest illustrates the fundamental difficulty of this research. There's a certain intangibleness to his approach by design. How does one grasp it and put it into a system? To specify and evaluate harmonic events, sometimes the horizontal flow of voices must be frozen in time and inspected from a vertical perspective. That's why, after this background information gathered, I moved on to musical analysis. After having collected a sufficient amount of transcribed material from Night Whispers, I started assembling a list of the most prominent repeated harmonic devices that I found. It is important to acknowledge that the categorization of these devices removes context and therefore never fully represents the essence of Copland's oeuvre. It can, however, function as a reference point for comparative analysis and, as I will demonstrate later in the results, can be used as a point of departure for creative endeavors. I am going to highlight a few of these instances that I named Coplandisms now to show how I worked. Cluster chords. A dense chord containing minor or major second rubs. Diminished octatonic harmony. Intervals, arpeggios or chords that stem from a whole tone, halftone or diminished scale. Non-diatonic thirds, sixths. The interval of a minor or major third or sixth, played simultaneously or successively, where one or both of the notes do not belong in the parent scale of the harmony. Polytonality, polymodality. 2 different harmonic worlds stacked onto each other, often separated by left and right hand on the piano. Stacked sixths. 2 pairs of minor or major sixths with varying intervals in between them are played simultaneously. Often, between 2 of the 4 notes, a minor second or an octavation of it is created. With this music glossary at hand, when looking at transcriptions of the Herbie Hancock tracks from Dedication, it was now easier to draw comparisons and find possible points of harmonic influence. In my interview with Copland, he speaks highly of Hancock's harmonic concepts.
The way he's going with the harmonies, he's not thinking this chord, that chord, this chord, that chord. He's more thinking, that was Bill. Bill was this chord, this voicing, this substitution, and they were great. But those 2 tracks, that's where I heard for me, that kind of approach.
Let's have a quick look at two examples. Hancock opens the rendition of his composition Maiden Voyage with a 6-note right-hand ostinato, which reels between the worlds of D-flat major and minor. It is contrasted by a motive in the left hand that reaches its highest note on E-flat when the right lands on an E, creating a minor second rub. Eventually, the figure and motive are developed and settle into the rhythmic opening riff of the composition in the key of D-flat. Already we recognize several elements from the music glossary. For example, the ostinato, polymodality, major versus minor, and minor second rubs that are essential for cluster chords. In Hancock's rendition of Dolphin Dance, quite a few movements stood out to me as Coplandish. At 1 minute 10, Hancock's use of chordal voicings that move in constant structure for a moment before ending on a dense D dominant chord evokes what we hear on Night Whispers 35 years later. The final dominant chord's upper structure is a diminished shape that shows up often in Copland's playing. It can also be seen as a G-sharp minor upper structure interlocked with the underlying D dominant 7 and creates a minor second rub with the minor 7th of the chord. Only a few seconds later at 132, two more harmonic motions that bear close connections to Coplandism surface. Deviating from the original recording, two target notes of the melody are re-harmonized with augmented chords. Copland employs augmented colors often as upper structures, as we can see in the musical glossary. To illustrate the first augmented sound, E-flat, which for added grit still has the perfect fifth as part of the chord voicing as well, Hancock uses 4-6, D B-flat, B G, F D-flat, D B-flat in a mid-high register. This move is highly reminiscent of Copland's non-diatonic sixths, especially in the tune The Bell Tolls. To answer the research questions 2 and 3, some practical exploration was in order. Most of Marc Copland's music has been recorded on an acoustic grand piano. I asked him about playing other keyboard instruments in our conversation, but apart from pointing towards one of the very few albums he plays a string synthesizer on, he says,
I don't really have an interest in doing that. You know, what I like is a nice, fat, mellow acoustic piano sound, you know.
As someone who enjoys involving various keyboard sounds into their creative practice, my interest was piqued to experiment combining these with elements from Night Whispers. I wrote a short composition entitled Croplands as a vehicle, incorporating several Coplandisms in the process, starting with an acoustic trio version to have a reference point. In the electric trio version of the composition, the acoustic piano is switched out for a Fender Rhodes sound and the upright bass is changed to an electric bass. The electric bass and Rhodes have a much more similar tone than upright bass and grand piano, the unison lines prove not as effective, if not overbearing, and some of the sonic interest therefore got lost. Overall, this path still seems viable though. In the organ trio version, the bass is replaced by the Hammond organ player's left hand, as is tradition in the organ trio setup. Unlike the standard lineup organ, guitar and drums, here a soprano saxophone takes over the melody and replaces the guitar to avoid harmonic clashes. As the melody is now given to the high-pitched soprano saxophone with its overtone-rich sonic qualities, the melody shines through in absolute clarity. For the majority of the chords, voicings have been put in a closed position to accommodate playing with only the right hand. To make this more playable, doubled notes were eliminated and melody notes have been mostly omitted. After its rearrangement, the organ trio version of Copland's still works fairly well. As the bass does not possess a body as powerful as an acoustic bass, the track tends to feel slightly empty when the left hand plays its answer to the main melody. Especially the low fifths fail to create the same excitement as in the acoustic version. During the walking bass section, the balance is more even. For the organ duo version, several compromises had to be made. With the left hand assuming its role from the previous version, almost all chord voicings had to be realized by the right hand, which also had to transport the melody. This presented various challenges, as certain 5-note voicings from the organ trio version were just not playable anymore, coming out of the melodic line. Overall, the emptiness is much more pronounced in this version, to the extent that the harmonic content sounds too minimal. The bass fifths sound dull and fail to transport dynamic interest. As the final step, I devised 2 versions of Copland's recorded purely with synthesizers. As swung jazz with synthesizers is quite rare, I replaced the underlying groove with a 12/8 rhythm that allows a ternary phrasing comparable to the original version. A synthesizer trio with drums, bass and a single synthesizer sound is a relatively rare occurrence, and this version was meant to be an additional opportunity for comparison with the more common synth arrangement. All in all, the sound of the single synthesizer is much more one-dimensional than that of an acoustic piano, one of the reasons being the fixed dynamic response of the keyboard. One advantage of the synthesizer bass is that lower notes become available. Low Ds and D flats that are only playable on a 5-string electric bass are easily in reach of the oscillator's extreme frequency range. This version comes a little closer to what synthesizers are most often used for in music production. Various sounds take on specialized roles. The melody is taken over by a monophonic lead voice, similar to the soprano saxophone in the organ trio version. A warm synth pad sound with a slow attack and a longer release plays long chords, providing a steady carpet of harmonic information. To support the melody, a more brilliant sound with fast attack doubles the synth's lead's rhythm and provides extra clarity during the kicks in bars 11 through 13. With these clearly defined roles and not too much overlap, the sonic image of Copland's becomes fleshed out while staying transparent. Hearing the Coplandish harmonies in a pure synthesized context is a little unusual at first, but I think with further fine-tuning, a sound could be reached that's a little less, let's call it whimsical, but also doesn't fit too much into the mold of 80s fusion jazz. As one way to internalize and make use of the gained insight on Copland's harmonic language, I decided to apply as many different techniques listed in the music glossary as possible. As you probably suspected, this really was an exercise to use a song from the Great American Songbook in an original piano arrangement. I chose the composition It's Only a Paper Moon. I went at it with a quite analytic approach, starting with the bare melody, then later smoothing over with intuition and taste. With the focus on voice leading as the guiding principle, I went back through the arrangement and inserted Coplandisms in parts where the musical interest seemed lacking. The reharmonization of a jazz standard using elements out of the musical glossary of Coplandisms in a modular fashion works well. One reason for that is the malleability of the source material, which leaves plenty of room for new harmonies. For a composition with more elaborate harmony, it might be more difficult, and indeed on some of the records where Copland is a sideman, he plays a, let's say, lighter level of reharmonization. As I was writing a big band composition while working on this thesis, I chose to make it a part of my explorations and test if certain harmonic elements of Copland's harmonies could be applied in the context of writing for a large ensemble. For the second movement of my composition, Three Tiles, I chose the stacked sixths as an impetus for composition. The exposition of the first motive is delivered by the piano, which is in the jazz trio style of Night Whispers, is only accompanied by bass and drums. The stacked sixths harmonizing the first melody in constant structure are a minor sixth on top and a major sixth on the bottom, set apart by a minor sixth. After that, the stacked sixths are transferred to the reed section, who, with their available doublings, create a much softer and more diffuse version of the same musical idea. Flute and alto flute take the upper sixth, while alto sax and clarinet play the lower one. Due to the instruments' respective ranges, this time the upper sixth is transposed down an octave. To soften the impact of the dissonant voicings in the overtone-rich woodwind environment, and at the same time to create rhythmic interest as the section plays unaccompanied, the lower sixth is first displaced by an eighth note. After the solo section, the sixth idea returns in the trumpet section, albeit in a closer voiced version. Trumpets 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are coupled and play the melody in interlocking sixth voicing. Some oblique motions in trumpets 2 and 4 is added to prohibit the motive becoming stale. The same idea can also be implemented into the low brass. In a short melodic section from bar 202, the trombones follow a similar pattern, although the section's ambitus is increased to a minor tenth to minimize problems with the lower interval limits. Concluding, we can see that making use of a small idea out of Copland's harmonic vocabulary made it possible to create a new piece of music for a large ensemble which bears an idiomatic signature without sounding plagiarized. Marc Copland, being influenced by a neoclassical composer, modern jazz piano greats, impressionist painters, and the music of Joni Mitchell, picking and choosing elements from their creation to piece together his own way of approaching his art, underwent an almost canonic protocol in the world of jazz, encapsulated in trumpeter Clark Terry's formula emulate, assimilate, innovate. The outcome, his harmonic expression, is however extremely personalized and recognizable. Some of the benefits that I've enjoyed through working on this thesis are expanding my musical hearing through the challenging transcription work necessary, finding new inspiration and motivation for composing, with the focus on horizontal voice movement, gaining more confidence in writing harmony that goes beyond a chord symbol or is not easily expressible with one. The idea of color over function opens up new possibilities in composing and playing. What can one take away from this? Taking harmonic concepts like Copland's and combining them with the new sounds and rhythmic idioms of hip-hop, electronica and neo-soul remains to be a large field of experimentation and discovery. Creative processes can be triggered from places that would seem dry and overly theoretical in the first moment, like my musical glossary, which for me proved to be a great source of creativity. For composers and arrangers, the transfer of Copland's ideas to bigger ensembles also opens up exciting alleys. The 3 wind sections of the big band, for example, provide the flexibility to cover Copland's harmonic idioms with the necessary amount of complexity, but they add exciting new timbres. For educators, how can a linear horizontal view be taught to a music student, and what assistance can the teacher give? At which point should it be taught in the student's educational career? Night Whispers is a fascinating album making use of a recognizable and idiomatic sound color that, astonishingly, after almost a year and a half of work, remains hard to put into words. Can the music glossary begin to grasp these mysterious moods? I have conflicting feelings about the cataloging of the Coplandisms. In addition to the possibility of omitting details and context, there is the danger of forcing things into categories for which they are not suited, a fact already lamented by Ernst Toch about music theory and the shaping forces of music. Compared to the intuitive way the music was created, the music glossary represents a certain over-intellectualization. On the other hand, for a novice to Copland, the systematic categorization of his harmonic material could be a valuable starting point, the same way it has helped me refine my harmonic vocabulary. When I asked Copland what he thought of the analytical approach to his music, he replied, "I do analytical stuff all the time, but it is usually on the back end. Using ears and intuition is not random at all. It's the same process as when talking or writing. You need to know and understand the grammar, but a deeper process is driving things when one is spontaneously communicating with words or music. This is the process that needs to be trained and utilized. At least that has been my experience playing, practicing and teaching for 59 years. To me, this statement shows a beautiful confluence of the themes covered in this thesis, while also demonstrating that analysis and following intuition are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they build upon each other, and proficiency in both domains needs to be cultivated. With this, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Welcome back to the live room, where we will continue now with the Q&A after hearing and watching Moritz's presentation. Thank you, Moritz, for this presentation. I would love to turn first to Janne for a first question, your supervisor.
Absolutely. Yes, so first of all, thank you for this massive research and for this great documentation. I think it's a very versatile one. When I was listening to this session this morning, I was like, I asked myself about our Western standards of listening to music, and if our catalog or our understanding is like our system is is detailed enough to outline specific sounds and like you know what I mean, to really say this is a, say, D flat major 7 whatever, because when I listen to this kind of music it feels like there is no, as you said in the beginning, no right or wrong, no dissonant or harmony. It's all about music as Marc Copland thinks it is. So what do you think do we would need a new system to catalog or like to write down specific harmony? And maybe second question, what did change while you researched your way of composition? This after this research, what did change to your music?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Well, yeah, the first one is a big question to answer, I suppose. I'm I'm not entirely sure if we need a new way of analyzing the music, or if we maybe just have to be content with a certain amount of this is the realm of stuff that we can theorize about, and this is just the realm of the improvisational world. I think this music of Copland bridges really nicely the gap between the analytical and the music. And yeah, I think it's a, as I said in my presentation as well, it's sometimes really hard to verbalize this process, and I still have sometimes I'm missing the words to put those sounds into to translate these sounds that we hear on the recording into words. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think it also needs a lot of actual listening experience. I think it's not done with just having this glossary that I made and looking at it and being like, oh, this is this and this is this, but actually listening to the sounds and digesting them. I think that's a task that will also go on for decades for me, because it's just such a complex world of harmonies that's developed there. Yeah. The second part of the question, as I touched upon a little bit in my conclusion, what was really eye-opening for me in this process was really to be able to write music and not be like, okay, this is a C minor 7 chord, for example, but just to have, for example, a melody and be like, okay, I want a somewhat dissonant sound on this. How can I arrange the notes, and then how do they go to the next moment, and be less in a world of I guess most of us jazz musicians, we grew up with the sheet music to standards, where it's like this is C minor, this is F dominant, and to kind of move away from this. But again, this is a slow process, and my teachers in the composition and the piano department also have helped in this process to start it. But yeah, once again, it's also it has just begun. So definitely trying to move away from too much chordal thinking is one of the big parts that I have taken out of that research.
Yeah. Maybe one follow-up. You talked about stacking up 6,
Mm-hmm.
right? Does it also have to do with the special sound that he kind of avoids to set a clear 3? In a lot of cases, to avoid a major or minor-ish sound.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
And
yeah.
So to have it more in a hexatonical, like in a symmetrical point of view.
I think that's quite possible. There's also in the transcriptions I also very often saw what we could call incomplete chords surfacing. So incomplete, of course, is a little bit of a what's the right word? Anyway, it has a little bit of a connotation already of that there's something important missing, but I think it's part of the whole appeal and the whole theory behind it to leave chords to leave notes out that otherwise have been thought of as important. Like you need the 3rd or the 7th to make a chord clear, but in this case that is not necessarily the intention. And I think with the 6th there's this beauty that on the one hand a 6th or it's or the turnaround version, the 3rd. Of course, they hint at a major or a minor chord. They can, but they don't make it absolutely clear. Yeah. There was one part in the Herbie Hancock transcription where he does something that really, where I really thought, oh, this sounds like Copland. But actually, for example, Hancock played, I think it was a D minor and an F minor chord over some other harmonies. And it's in the same instance, I think when I look at Copland stuff, he would actually opt for the 6th to have this a bit more open or more ambiguous kind of sound.
Good, thanks.
So, so really, congratulations. It was
Thank
a
you.
really nice thesis and a really nice presentation.
Right.
I was reading your thesis, and I also seen in the presentation that, and we've talked also a little bit, and I know that you are also a composer, and you have this idea of the organization of the compositions. You explore it into a big ensemble. What is all of it is really nice. But you also do these things with the keyboards. So from the orchestration point of view, you kind of explore all the possibilities that this harmony brings, no? These ideas are bringing. But what about, did you do any kind of exploration in the trio, in the proper idea of the small combo? Because this is a recording that it has kind of a lot also to see with what the other musicians are playing. No? And it's well known also for the coloristic approach to the music in that perspective. Did you do anything? I mean, the question is actually, how does this language relate to what groupal improvisation is, or to what the other musicians are doing, if that makes any sense? Have you done any kind of, did you do, what do you see there?
So I can answer that question in a certain aspect, as that I was of course interested in, for example, what's the bass player's role in such a harmonically involved environment, because yeah, I mean, when we, for example, we listen to Bill Evans' trio stuff where the bass is very emancipated, very much in the forefront. But I also talked to Doug Weiss, who also played with Copland for a bit and recorded, and he was very clear about that in such a band and such a position, it's like hug the bottom is often his thing, and it's not detrimental to the job of the bass player, but it makes the bass player's job even more important to be there and to really deliver the foundation, so that the pianist has the freedom to develop these harmonic ideas, right? Because if there's too much interference in that moment from the bass, then that would yeah, probably be overwhelming. I think that's also probably the difficulty that comes along if you explode those voicings into large ensembles, that you have to be really careful not to overload the harmonic spectrum with this dissonance and the difficulty that comes with dealing with those harmonies. Yeah.
Really nice.
Thank you.
Any questions right now in the room? Yes, Octavian?
Did you find in the end, because you explored this acoustic versus with synthesizers and stuff, did you find any sort of combination that was actually cooler than the acoustic one? Because I remember you said that the acoustic one was kind of the most balanced and the kind of coolest sounding, but
yeah, it's a little bit hard to answer, because of course I listened to this album over and over, and you have this I think it sounds really nice, and you have this sonic image in your head which sounds like the gold standard, and all of a sudden, so in a way, for me at first all the other versions were a little bit disappointing, but then again I think if once I managed to, maybe I have to stop listening to this album for a while now and come back to it, and I think I thought it was pretty interesting, at least the synthesizer version, for example, I think there's a lot of things to be developed there, and I definitely will go further in this direction, because I have to be honest, I like this whimsical kind of sound as well, that comes out at some points, and I think it's very exciting, because I also just think that, for example, even in a more danceable context, let's say we have a nice, like an electronic groove, and instead of just playing maybe just a minor chord, maybe you throw in some of these harmonies very sparingly. I think that could be a nice effect already, and it's something that I'm definitely willing to try out in the future.
But just to continue on my question, so you only experimented with the one synth sound, I guess, right? Or did you experiment with more, really trying to, because you mentioned there was this problem of like, in some cases the melody maybe can get lost a bit in the timbre, or maybe the bass doesn't have enough variety in timbre from the chords to really make that juicy difference.
Yeah, so far those were my explorations. Yeah, in the second synth example, you probably already heard there were much more diverse sounds used, and I think that can be a nice way to fill up the sonic spectrum that is there. Yeah, but it's still a point of research-worthy point. Let's put it like that.
Maybe one question for me about a little bit continuing on Janning's first question, because I find it an interesting question, this question of how we symbolize the harmony maybe a little bit more. Because you enter this world of polymodality, where I guess we're left with slash systems of writing and complicated tension structures, what we typically tend to go for with our harmonic visualization. Do you feel this way of representing a chord really speaks also towards the understanding of the reader? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Or do you feel there are other ways maybe thinkable to make it more like grasp the actual meaning of the sound?
Well, to me as a keyboard player, I'm usually somewhat happy with the slash symbols because it just makes sense of how we understand the instrument. I'm quite unhappy when I have like a chord that says C sharp 5, then there's a million of sharps and flats behind it, because that doesn't really, I don't know, it's really hard to translate and often doesn't represent the sound. And I think that in the slash symbols, at least we can see this, what Toch was talking about, those different harmonic streams, and make them more clearly appear to a player in a band situation or something like that. Does it really translate the sound? I'm not so sure. I think in the way when we use upper structures, for example, in writing or something like that, I think this is, it can get, with a bit of experience, you get used to what this will sound like, and you also have the harmonic, this is a 13 sharp 9 or something like that. With the polymodal moments, as I said, I think it takes a lot of experience and listening work, probably decades worth, to really be able to link that sound to a written symbol for it.
Might it be a little bit, if I'm catching what you're saying, it's kind of like when you start studying, you read F over G, you might not right away understand that that's just some sus kind of color, but at some point you're so used to that symbol that you also know the meaning. Is that kind of what you're saying in this case, that you can get used to these representations that first look complicated, but when you digest it a lot, you will internalize it equally?
I think so. There's this one, in the examples, there was this one E minor world over A flat dominant world, and I happened to catch myself playing that recently on a gig, and I was like, that's where that comes from. So I think it can eventually seep into your, can internalize it, can seep into your playing, but I think it takes time. It's a very concentrated effort to really get that down.
And then a little follow-up on that, where do you feel you stand with the internalization of all this, let's say of your glossary, let's put it this way?
Right at the beginning. The thing is also, I think that's also probably then the weakness of the glossary. When I'm like, I have this, I'm at the end of a ballad, I have this nice major chord, and now I play some sixths over it that are non-diatonic, then I sometimes do it, but I immediately think, that sounds like Copland. And I don't want to be doing that. I just want to somehow take those sounds and be able to have my own expression with it. So that's why I say I'm right at the beginning, because now I can do some things, and then I think, that sounds like Copland, great. But so it will take a lot of time, I think. And I think, in a way, also the target is, or the goal is that I don't have to think about it like that. I don't have to think like, okay, let's put some sixths there. But to have it as a natural part of my expression.
Do you think it's fair to say that you should accept to first sound like Copland and then get beyond it?
I think that's the way it goes, right? You transcribe a lot of Bird, and then you sound like Bird for a while, and then you move on hopefully to the next thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Great, then we will leave it at this. Thank you very much for your presentation.